In the winter of 2007, a frail man in his late 70s sat across from two FBI agents in a cramped interview room in downtown Philadelphia. His hands trembled as he slid a worn manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, marriage certificates, bank statements, and handwritten notes spanning nearly 3 decades. The man's name was Leonard Hayes, and what he was about to reveal would unravel one of the most calculated and patient marriage fraud schemes in American history. Between 1982 and 1989, a woman named Vanessa Elaine Porter had systematically married 5 different men across 3 states, extracting a combined total of $5.7 million through a web of forged documents, manipulated insurance policies, and stolen inheritances. She had vanished completely in 1990. Living off her fortune in absolute obscurity for 23 years. Nobody had been able to find her. Nobody even knew all 5 marriages had been connected to the same woman. The cases had remained cold in Detroit, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, filed away as separate incidents of suspected fraud that investigators could never quite prove. But Leonard Hayes had kept every secret, every document, every piece of evidence for more than 2 decades. And now, with his own health failing and his conscience weighing on him, he was ready to tell everything. The amount Vanessa had stolen was staggering, but what made the case truly extraordinary was the discipline required to execute it. Throughout the entire period of her crimes, she worked as a part-time receptionist at medical billing offices, living in modest apartments, driving used cars, and blending seamlessly into working-class neighborhoods. She never bought flashy jewelry or designer clothes. She never vacationed in Europe or purchased luxury vehicles. Every dollar she took was hidden, stored, and left untouched, waiting for the day she could disappear entirely. That day came in March of 1990, when she walked out of her apartment in South Philadelphia with 2 suitcases and was never seen again by anyone who knew her real name. For 23 years, she lived in motel rooms, rented basements, and subsidized housing across the Midwest, working sporadically under false names, always moving, always careful, always alone. The money remained hidden in ways so clever that even after Leonard's confession, it would take investigators another 9 months to locate all of it. This is the story of Vanessa Elaine Porter, a woman who turned marriage into a calculated business and patience into an art form. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Vanessa Elaine Porter was born in August of 1954 in Gary, Indiana, the youngest of 3 daughters in a household defined by financial instability and broken promises. Her father, a factory worker at a steel plant, left the family when Vanessa was 7 years old, and her mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide to keep food on the table. Vanessa grew up watching her mother struggle, watching creditors call, watching the electricity get shut off twice in the same winter. Her older sisters married young and moved away, but Vanessa stayed in Gary through high school, quiet and observant, never causing trouble, never asking for much. Teachers described her as polite but distant, a girl who kept to herself and rarely shared anything personal. She graduated in 1972 with average grades and no clear plans for the future. She worked at a grocery store for 2 years, then took a job as a receptionist at a small medical billing office in Hammond, Indiana. It was steady work, and she was good at it. She understood paperwork, understood systems, understood how to make herself invisible in the background of an office while absorbing everything happening around her. What her coworkers did not know was that Vanessa had begun studying the men who came into the office. Older men, mostly, with good insurance, stable pensions, and no immediate family. She watched how they spoke to the billing clerks, how they struggled with forms, how they mentioned being widowed or divorced in passing conversation. She began to see patterns. Loneliness was a currency, and she was learning how to spend it. By the time she turned 25 in 1979, Vanessa had dated 3 different men, all of them significantly older, all of them financially comfortable. She never stayed long. She would move in for a few months, learn their routines, learn their finances, and then leave quietly, always with a reason that seemed understandable. A sick relative, a job opportunity in another city, a need for space. None of the relationships ended badly. None of the men suspected anything. She was always kind, always apologetic, always grateful, and she was always watching. In early 1982, Vanessa moved to Detroit. She rented a small one-bedroom apartment in the Brightmoor neighborhood on the west side, a working-class area with tree-lined streets and modest homes. She found work at another medical billing office, this time handling insurance claims for a network of private physicians. She was 27 years old, attractive in an understated way, with dark hair she kept pulled back, and a wardrobe of simple dresses and cardigans that made her look professional and approachable. She did not go to bars or clubs. She did not advertise herself. Instead, she went to church. Every Sunday morning, she attended services at Greater Faith Baptist Church on Grand River Avenue, a large congregation with a significant population of older, single, and widowed men. She sat near the back, always alone, always dressed modestly, always carrying a Bible. She smiled politely when spoken to, but never pushed for conversation. She was patient. She waited for the right person to notice her. His name was Raymond Tillman, and he was 61 years old when he met Vanessa in the spring of 1982. Raymond was a retired postal worker who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. He had no children, no close family, and a pension that provided him with a comfortable monthly income of nearly $3,000. He also had a life insurance policy worth $450,000, naming his late wife as the sole beneficiary. The policy had never been updated. Raymond lived alone in a small brick house on Fenkell Avenue, spent his days gardening and watching television, and attended church every Sunday because it was the only social interaction he had left. When he noticed Vanessa sitting by herself one morning in May, he introduced himself after the service. She was warm, gentle, and easy to talk to. They began sitting together during services. Within 2 months, Raymond had invited her to dinner. Within 4 months, they were seeing each other regularly. Vanessa never asked for anything. She never mentioned money. She simply listened to Raymond talk about his late wife, about his loneliness, about how difficult it was to fill the hours of the day. She was exactly what he needed. By October of 1982, Raymond had asked Vanessa to move in with him. She hesitated at first, explaining that she did not want to rush things, that she valued their relationship too much to risk it. But Raymond insisted. He told her he felt alive again for the first time in years. He told her he loved her. Vanessa agreed, but only if they could keep things simple and private. She did not want a big announcement. She did not want attention. Raymond respected that. She moved into his house on Fenkell Avenue in early November, bringing only a few boxes of clothes and personal items. She continued working at the medical billing office. She continued attending church with Raymond. To neighbors, they looked like a quiet, loving couple. No one suspected anything unusual. What Raymond did not know was that Vanessa had already begun the process of marrying him on paper, if not in his mind. Before she ever brought him to an office, she had spent weeks quietly researching notaries and small legal services downtown. She deliberately chose places that were understaffed and overwhelmed, the kind of storefront offices where one person juggled phone calls, walk-ins, and paperwork alone. These were the people least likely to question an extra form in a stack. In late November of 1982, she convinced Raymond to visit a notary public in downtown Detroit to update his will. She explained that it was important to have his affairs in order, especially now that they were living together. Raymond agreed without hesitation. The notary, a man named Gerald Stamps, who operated a small office on Woodward Avenue, processed the paperwork quickly. Raymond signed the updated will, naming Vanessa as his primary beneficiary. What Raymond did not realize was that Vanessa had also brought a marriage license application with her that day. She had filled it out in advance, forging Raymond's signature in several places, and had slipped it into the stack of documents the notary was processing. Gerald's stamps, behind schedule and more focused on stamping and filing than scrutinizing details, notarized the marriage license without asking questions. In that era, identification checks were often cursory at best, especially in small private offices. Vanessa paid him in cash and walked out with a legally binding marriage certificate dated November 28, 1982. Raymond never knew he had been married. Over the next 3 months, Vanessa worked methodically to position herself as Raymond's legal spouse in every financial institution that mattered. At the time, many companies still relied heavily on mailed-in forms and paper records, and beneficiary changes were often processed without in-person verification. She contacted his life insurance company, Metropolitan Life, and requested a beneficiary change form, citing their recent marriage. She provided the notarized marriage certificate as proof. The company processed the change by mail, updating the policy to name Vanessa Elaine Tillman as the sole beneficiary of the $450,000 policy. She also visited Raymond's bank, First National Bank of Detroit, and requested to be added as a joint account holder on his savings and checking accounts. She brought the marriage certificate again, along with Raymond's driver's license, which she had borrowed from his wallet one morning while he was in the shower. The bank teller, a young woman named Patricia, who had worked there for less than 6 months, processed the request without requiring Raymond to appear in person. For small branches in the early 80s, a marriage certificate and matching ID were often enough. Vanessa was added to both accounts by mid-January of 1983. She now had legal access to over $60,000 in savings, as well as Raymond's monthly pension deposits. Raymond's health began to decline in February of 1983. He had been managing high blood pressure and mild diabetes for years, with documented visits to his physician, but the conditions worsened suddenly. He complained of dizziness and fatigue. Vanessa insisted he see a doctor, and Raymond agreed, though he delayed making an appointment for several weeks. On the morning of March 14, 1983, Raymond collapsed in the kitchen while making coffee. Vanessa called 911 immediately, her voice calm and steady on the recorded line. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and transported Raymond to Detroit Receiving Hospital, where he was pronounced dead 40 minutes later. The cause of death was listed as a massive stroke, consistent with his existing health conditions and medical history. In a man his age, with his record, there was nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. No autopsy was performed. Vanessa identified the body, signed the necessary paperwork, and arranged for a modest funeral through a local funeral home. She paid for everything in cash. Fewer than a dozen people attended the service. Within 2 weeks of Raymond's death, Vanessa filed a claim with Metropolitan Life for the life insurance payout. She provided the death certificate, the marriage certificate, and her identification. The company processed the claim without issue, following the same lax verification procedures that had allowed her to change the beneficiary in the first place. On April 9, 1983, Vanessa received a check for $450,000. She deposited it into a new account at a different bank, Comerica, under her married name, Vanessa Tillman. She also withdrew the $60,000 from Raymond's accounts at First National, closing both accounts and citing her need to settle his estate. As she paid off the mortgage on Raymond's house, listed it for sale, and sold it by late May for $92,000. In total, Vanessa had extracted just over $600,000 from Raymond Tillman's life in less than 6 months. She never returned to Greater Faith Baptist Church. She never contacted Raymond's few remaining friends or distant relatives. She simply disappeared from that part of her life, moving quietly into a new apartment in the North End neighborhood of Detroit and resuming her work at the medical billing office as though nothing had happened. But Vanessa was not finished. She had learned that the system was even easier to manipulate than she had expected. The notaries did not ask questions. The insurance companies rarely verified anything beyond paperwork. The banks often accepted certificates and IDs without requiring the account holder to appear in person. She had proven that with patience, forged documents, and the right target, someone elderly, lonely, and already medically fragile, She could extract enormous sums of money without ever being detected. And so, in the fall of 1983, she began again. Her second target was a man named Ernest Dupree, a 68-year-old retired auto worker living in Baltimore, Maryland. Vanessa had met Ernest through a classified ad in a regional newspaper that summer. He had placed an ad in the personal section, describing himself as a lonely widower looking for companionship. Vanessa responded with a carefully crafted letter, introducing herself as a medical office worker from Detroit who was considering relocating to the East Coast. She included a modest photograph of herself and described her love of quiet evenings, church services, and simple living. Ernest responded enthusiastically, and they began exchanging letters throughout the summer and fall. By November of 1983, Vanessa had moved to Baltimore, renting a small apartment in the Hampton neighborhood and taking a part-time job at a medical billing office near Johns Hopkins Hospital. She met Ernest in person for the first time on a cold Saturday afternoon in December, and they spent the day walking through the Inner Harbor, talking about their lives, their losses, their hopes for the future. Ernest was gentle, kind, and deeply lonely. He told Vanessa that he had lost his wife 5 years earlier and that his 2 adult children lived out of state and rarely visited. He owned his home outright, had a modest pension from Ford Motor Company, and a life insurance policy worth $300,000. He told Vanessa all of this within the first month of their relationship because he trusted her completely. Vanessa moved into Ernest's home in February of 1984. The process was nearly identical to what she had done with Raymond, refined by what she had already learned. She convinced Ernest to update his will, arranged a visit to a small neighborhood notary public again, a one-person office she had chosen precisely because it was overworked, and forged a marriage license in the process. By March of 1984, she was legally listed as Ernest's wife in county records, though Ernest believed they were simply living together and planning to marry later in the year. Vanessa changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy, added herself to his bank accounts, and waited. Ernest's health was fragile. He had emphysema from decades of smoking, his condition documented in years of medical records, and his breathing grew worse throughout the spring. Vanessa encouraged him to see a doctor, but Ernest was stubborn and hated hospitals. On the morning of June 3, 1984, Ernest suffered a severe respiratory episode and was rushed to Johns Hopkins by ambulance. He died in the emergency room less than an hour later. Vanessa was by his side, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face as nurses tried to console her. The attending physician listed the cause of death as acute respiratory failure due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Given his long-standing diagnosis, no autopsy was ordered. Vanessa collected $300,000 from Ernest's life insurance policy, $80,000 from his bank accounts, and $130,000 from the sale of his home. In total, she had taken $510,000 from Ernest Dupree. She left Baltimore in September of 1984, moving to Philadelphia and starting the process again. Her third victim was a man named Calvin Rhodes, a 72-year-old retired accountant living alone in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. Calvin had no children, no siblings, and no close friends. He attended a small Lutheran church on Green Street, where Vanessa began attending services in October of 1984. She introduced herself as a recent transplant from Baltimore, a widow looking for a fresh start. Calvin was immediately drawn to her. They began having coffee after church, then dinners at his home, then long walks through Fairmount Park. By January of 1985, Vanessa had moved into Calvin's row house on Chelton Avenue. She repeated the same process, a seowika, forged marriage license slipped into a stack of estate planning documents at a local notary, an updated will, beneficiary changes on his life insurance and bank accounts. Calvin had a history of heart problems, a fact Vanessa knew from the questions on his insurance forms and stray comments about his medication. On May 19, 1985, he died of a heart attack in his sleep. His physician, familiar with his cardiac issues, signed off on the death certificate without suspicion. No autopsy, no investigation. Vanessa collected $270,000 from his life insurance, $60,000 from his savings, and $105,000 from the sale of his home. She left Philadelphia in August of 1985 and returned to Detroit. Her fourth victim was a man named Jerome Washington, a 65-year-old retired electrician living in the Corktown neighborhood of Detroit. Jerome had lost his wife in a car accident in 1981 and had been living alone ever since. He had a small pension, a life insurance policy worth $500,000, and a two-story brick house on Bagley Street that he had owned for 30 years. Vanessa met Jerome at a community center in September of 1985, where he was volunteering to help organize a senior breakfast program. She volunteered alongside him, and they developed a friendship that turned romantic by November. Vanessa moved in with Jerome in February of 1986, and by April she had secured a forged marriage license, updated his will, and changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. Jerome had a documented history of high blood pressure and a family history of aneurysms, details Vanessa quietly took note of. On August 7, 1986, Jerome collapsed while working in his backyard garden. The official cause of death was a sudden aneurysm. His age, medical history, and the circumstances made it a tragedy, but not a mystery. Vanessa collected $500,000 from his life insurance, $90,000 from his bank accounts, and $150,000 from the sale of his house. She moved to a small apartment in Dearborn and continued working at her medical billing job, just another office worker with a quiet life and no visible luxuries. Her fifth and final victim was a man named Leonard Hayes, a 63-year-old retired civil engineer living in the Chestnut Hill section of Philadelphia. Leonard was different from the others. He was wealthier, more educated, and more cautious. He had been widowed for only 2 years when he met Vanessa at an art gallery opening in Center City in March of 1987. Vanessa had attended the event specifically to meet someone like Leonard. She had researched attendees through social circles and donor lists and learned that Leonard was a regular supporter of the museum, that he had no children, and that he had a considerable estate worth over $1.2 million. She approached him carefully, engaging him in conversation about the paintings on display, mentioning her late husband's supposed love of art, and expressing her own loneliness in a new city. Leonard was charmed. They began seeing each other regularly throughout the spring and summer. Vanessa did not rush. She understood that Leonard required more time, more trust, more careful handling. She moved into his brownstone on West Evergreen Avenue in November of 1987, but she did not attempt to forge a marriage license this time. Leonard's social circle was larger, his attorney more involved, and his paperwork more tightly controlled. She could not risk a shortcut. Instead, she waited. She built his trust. She managed his household, cooked his meals, accompanied him to social events, and became indispensable to his life. In March of 1988, Leonard asked Vanessa to marry him. She accepted, and they were married in a small private ceremony on April 16, 1988, with a legitimate marriage license and a justice of the peace officiating. This was the only legal marriage Vanessa ever entered. Leonard updated his will immediately after the wedding, naming Vanessa as his sole heir. He also changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policies, which totaled $900,000, and added Vanessa to all of his bank accounts. But Leonard did not die. His health remained strong. Months passed, then a year, then 2 years. Vanessa grew anxious. She had never stayed with a victim this long. She had never been legally married. She had never had to wait. By early 1989, she began to realize that Leonard might live for another decade or more. She could not wait that long. She needed the money now. And so, in October of 1989, Vanessa made a decision. She would leave Leonard, but she would not divorce him. She would simply disappear, taking only what she could carry and leave the rest behind. It was a calculated risk. If Leonard died while they were still legally married, she would inherit everything by default. If he did not, she would at least have the money she had already accumulated from the previous 4 victims, carefully hidden and almost entirely untouched. On the morning of March 12, 1990, Vanessa packed 2 suitcases with clothes, documents, and a small amount of cash. She left a note on the kitchen table, telling Leonard that she needed time to think, that she was overwhelmed, that she would be in touch soon. She walked out of the brownstone on West Evergreen Avenue and disappeared. She took a bus to Chicago, then another to St. Louis, then another to Kansas City. She checked into a weekly motel under the name Sandra Ellis, paid in cash, and began the second phase of her life. For 23 years, Vanessa lived in absolute obscurity. She moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than 6 months. She lived in weekly motels, rented rooms in boarding houses, and subsidized housing complexes across Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska. She worked sporadically, taking cash jobs as a housekeeper, a caregiver, and a receptionist under various false names. When she needed identification, she did what she had quietly practiced since the 80s. She stole identities from the dead. Names and birth dates pulled from obituaries, baptism records, and small-town newspapers became the foundation for forged state IDs and basic paperwork bought cheaply on the black market. She never used her real identity. She never contacted anyone from her past. She dyed her hair, gained weight, and adopted a wardrobe of oversized sweatshirts and jeans that made her blend into the background of every working-class neighborhood she inhabited. The money she had stolen remained hidden in ways so carefully planned that even she rarely accessed it. Before disappearing in 1990, she had converted large amounts of the payouts into cash and bearer bonds purchased in the years before tighter regulations took hold. She opened safety deposit boxes in small rural banks across the Midwest, using forged IDs based on the identities of deceased women. In that era, many of those banks accepted minimal documentation, relying on paper records and personal assurances. In those boxes, she stored cash, jewelry, and bearer bonds that had no names attached, only serial numbers. What couldn't be locked away, she buried. Metal boxes filled with bills and valuables were buried near highway exits, in wooded areas, and on the edges of farm fields. Their locations marked on hand-drawn maps she kept hidden in the lining of her suitcases. She sewed cash into the hems of curtains, the seams of pillows, and the padding of winter coats. She lived on less than $20,000 a year, working just enough to cover her rent and food, never drawing attention, never making big purchases. The fortune she had stolen sat in darkness, growing old with her. But Vanessa was not free. She was paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly expecting police to knock on her door. She avoided hospitals, avoided government offices, avoided anyone who might ask for identification. She moved whenever someone asked too many questions, whenever a landlord seemed too curious, whenever she felt exposed. She developed insomnia, waking in the middle of the night convinced that someone had found her. She stopped trusting anyone. She stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. She became a ghost, living in a world where she could never relax, never feel safe, never believe that she had truly escaped. In Philadelphia, Leonard Hayes had reported Vanessa missing in April of 1990, 3 weeks after she disappeared. He filed a report with the Philadelphia Police Department, describing his wife and the circumstances of her disappearance. Detectives interviewed neighbors, checked hospitals, and searched for any sign of her, but Vanessa had left no trail. Her bus tickets were bought in cash. She left no forwarding address. The case was classified as a voluntary missing person, and after 6 months it was moved to inactive status. Leonard never stopped looking. He hired 2 different private investigators over the years, but neither found anything. He never remarried. He lived alone in the brownstone on West Evergreen Avenue, waiting for Vanessa to return, hoping that she was safe, never suspecting the truth about who she really was. In the summer of 2006, Leonard's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, and doctors gave him less than a year to live. Faced with his own mortality, Leonard began sorting through his personal papers, organizing his estate, and preparing for the end. It was during this process that he discovered a locked metal box hidden in the back of Vanessa's closet, a closet he had left untouched since she disappeared. The box was small, no larger than a shoebox, and it was secured with a padlock. Leonard broke the lock with a hammer and opened the box. Inside, he found documents that would change everything. There were marriage certificates, 5 of them, each one bearing Vanessa's name and the name of a different man. There were death certificates for Raymond Tillman, Ernest Dupree, Calvin Rhodes, and Jerome Washington. There were insurance payout records, bank statements, property sale documents, and handwritten notes detailing addresses, dates, and dollar amounts. There were photographs of Vanessa with each man, smiling, holding hands, attending weddings and funerals. Leonard stared at the contents of the box for hours, unable to process what he was seeing. The woman he had loved, the woman he had married, the woman he had mourned for 16 years was not who he thought she was. She was a criminal, a predator, a murderer perhaps. He did not know what to do. He did not know if he should report it, if he should destroy it, if he should pretend he had never found it. But as the cancer spread and his pain increased, Leonard made a decision. He could not die without telling the truth. In December of 2006, Leonard contacted the FBI field office in Philadelphia and requested a meeting. He explained that he had information about a series of potential insurance fraud cases dating back to the 1980s. 2 agents, Special Agent Rebecca Torres and Special Agent Michael Grant, agreed to meet with him in January of 2007. Leonard brought the metal box with him to the meeting, along with copies of his own marriage certificate and financial records. He laid everything out on the table and told them the story of Vanessa Elaine Porter, his wife, who had disappeared 17 years earlier. The agents listened carefully, taking notes, photographing documents, and asking detailed questions about Vanessa's appearance, her habits, her background. They told Leonard they would investigate and thanked him for coming forward. Leonard died on March 4, 2007, less than 2 months after the meeting. He never learned what became of the investigation. The FBI agents assigned to the case immediately recognized the scope of what Leonard had uncovered. This was not a single fraud case. This was a serial operation spanning multiple states, multiple victims, and multiple jurisdictions. Agent Torres contacted the Detroit Police Department, the Baltimore Police Department, and the Philadelphia Police Department, requesting case files on Raymond Tillman, Ernest Dupree, Calvin Rhodes, and Jerome Washington. Each department confirmed that the deaths had occurred, that the life insurance payouts had been processed, and that no investigations had been opened at the time because nothing had seemed suspicious. All 4 men had existing medical conditions. All 4 deaths had been consistent with those conditions. No one had ever thought to connect their quiet funerals to a woman who disappeared in 1990. Agent Grant began tracing the financial records, contacting insurance companies, banks, and property title offices to confirm the transactions Vanessa had made. Everything checked out. Every document was legitimate on its face. Every signature had been notarized. Every dollar had been transferred legally according to the paperwork. Vanessa had committed the perfect crime, not through violence or deception in the moment, but through patience, planning, and exploiting the bureaucratic systems that were supposed to protect people like Raymond, Ernest, Calvin, and Jerome. But the FBI had one advantage. They had Vanessa's real name, her photograph, and her signature on dozens of documents. They began building a profile, searching for any record of Vanessa Elaine Porter after 1990. They found nothing. No tax filings, no employment records, no medical visits, no driver's license renewals, no utility bills. She had vanished completely. Agent Torres expanded the search, looking for women matching Vanessa's description who had been arrested, hospitalized, or died in the intervening years. She found 3 possible matches, but all were ruled out through fingerprint and dental record comparisons. Vanessa was still alive, still hiding, still out there somewhere. The breakthrough came in August of 2008, 18 months after Leonard's death. A woman calling herself Sandra Ellis had been hospitalized at St. Luke's Medical Center in Kansas City, Missouri, following a severe asthma attack. She had no insurance, no identification, and no emergency contacts. The hospital social worker, a woman named Tanya Brooks, had tried to help Sandra apply for emergency Medicaid, but Sandra refused, insisting she would pay in cash and leave as soon as possible. Tanya found Sandra's behavior unusual and reported it to the hospital's security office, noting that Sandra seemed terrified of providing any personal information. The security officer ran Sandra's name through a database of missing persons and outstanding warrants and found nothing. But he also filed a report with the Kansas City Police Department, documenting Sandra's unusual behavior in case it became relevant later. That report made its way to the FBI through a routine information-sharing protocol between local police and federal agencies. Agent Torres reviewed the report in October of 2008 and noticed something in the description of Sandra Ellis that matched the profile of Vanessa Porter. The age was right. The physical description was close. The paranoia and refusal to provide identification fit the behavior of someone living under a false identity. Torres traveled to Kansas City and met with Tanya Brooks, who provided a copy of the intake form Sandra had filled out by hand when she arrived at the hospital. The handwriting was distinctive, with sharp angles and precise lettering. Agent Torres compared it to the handwritten notes found in Leonard's metal box. The handwriting matched. The FBI launched a full surveillance operation. They traced Sandra Ellis to a weekly motel on Independence Avenue in Kansas City, a rundown building with peeling paint and barred windows. They watched her for 3 weeks, documenting her movements, her habits, her routines. She worked part-time at a laundromat 2 blocks away, folding clothes and cleaning machines for minimum wage. She bought groceries at a discount store and cooked meals in her motel room on a hot plate. She never spoke to anyone unless absolutely necessary. She never left the neighborhood except to cash her paychecks at a check-cashing store on Truman Road. She was living exactly the way someone would live if they were hiding. On the morning of November 14, 2008, FBI agents executed a search warrant on Sandra Ellis's motel room. Vanessa was inside, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching television. She did not run. She did not resist. She simply looked at the agents and said nothing. Inside the room, agents found 2 suitcases containing clothes, toiletries, and personal items. They also found a large duffel bag hidden under the bed, packed with cash totaling over $400,000. In the closet, they found a metal lockbox containing bearer bonds worth over $2 million, bonds purchased in the late 1980s, long before stricter regulations and reporting requirements had made such instruments rare. There was also jewelry, including a diamond ring that had belonged to Ernest Dupree's late wife. Sewn into the lining of the suitcases were hand-drawn maps marking the locations of buried boxes in rural areas across Missouri, Kansas, and Iowa. Over the next 6 months, investigators would follow those maps and recover an additional $1.8 million in cash and valuables from those locations. Money and assets that had been sitting untouched for decades, waiting for a retirement Vanessa never lived to see. Vanessa was arrested and charged with 5 counts of wire fraud, 5 counts of insurance fraud, and multiple counts of identity theft and document forgery. She was extradited to Philadelphia, where the majority of her crimes had occurred and where the federal prosecutors chose to centralize the case. During interrogation, Vanessa said very little. She did not deny what she had done. She did not express remorse. She simply stated that she had done what she needed to do to survive, that she had never hurt anyone physically, that the men had died of natural causes. When asked why she had stayed hidden for so long instead of enjoying the money, Vanessa explained that she knew the moment she spent it openly on houses, cars, travel, someone would notice. She said she had planned to wait until she was old enough that no one would question a widow living modestly on savings. She said she had almost made it. Vanessa's trial began in April of 2010. Prosecutors presented the overwhelming evidence: the forged marriage licenses, the insurance payouts, the property sales, the hidden cash, the maps, the jewelry, and the financial trails that tied each payout to her. They called witnesses from each city, including notaries who had processed her documents, bank tellers who had added her to accounts under now outdated procedures, and neighbors who remembered seeing her with each victim. Medical experts testified that all 4 deceased husbands outside Leonard had well-documented health conditions, and that there was no proof Vanessa had directly caused any of their deaths, only that she had positioned herself to benefit from them. The defense leaned on that point. They argued that Vanessa had not caused the deaths of any of the men, that they had all died of natural causes, and that the fraud charges, while serious, did not constitute murder. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On May 3, 2010, they found Vanessa guilty on all counts. Vanessa was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. The judge, a woman named Honorable Margaret Stanton, called the case one of the most calculated and patient frauds she had ever seen. She noted that while Vanessa had not physically harmed her victims, she had exploited their loneliness, their trust, and their vulnerability in the cruelest possible way. She said that Vanessa had stolen not just money, but the dignity and memory of 5 men who had loved her. Vanessa showed no emotion during the sentencing. She was escorted out of the courtroom and transported to Federal Correctional Institution Danbury in Connecticut, where she remains today. The families of Vanessa's victims, though most were distant relatives or estranged children, were notified of the case and given the opportunity to recover any remaining assets. Most declined, stating they wanted nothing to do with the money. The recovered funds were eventually distributed to victim compensation programs and estate settlements. The case prompted changes in how life insurance companies and banks verify beneficiary changes, requiring more frequent in-person confirmations and additional documentation for policies over a certain amount. Several states also tightened their notary public regulations, requiring more thorough identity verification before processing marriage licenses and other legal documents. For those who knew Vanessa during her years in hiding, the revelation of her true identity was shocking. Former landlords, co-workers, and neighbors described her as quiet, unremarkable, and always polite. None of them suspected she was carrying millions of dollars in stolen money or that she was wanted for fraud across multiple states. The case became a subject of fascination in true crime circles, not for its violence but for its patience. Vanessa had committed 5 separate frauds over 7 years, stolen over $5.7 million, and lived in complete obscurity for 23 years without ever being caught. It was only Leonard Hayes' conscience and his decision to come forward that brought her story to light. The question that haunted investigators, and that continues to haunt those who study the case, is whether Vanessa would have ever been caught if Leonard had not found the metal box. She had been so careful, so disciplined, so patient. She had survived decades without making a single obvious mistake that would have exposed her. She had resisted the temptation to spend the money, to travel, to live comfortably, because she understood that the moment she did, someone would notice. She had sacrificed her freedom, her identity, and, in many ways, her humanity for money she never truly used. And in the end, it was her own careful documentation, her own need to keep records of what she had done, that destroyed her. Vanessa Elaine Porter's story is a reminder that crime is not always loud, violent, or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, methodical, and patient. It is a reminder that the most dangerous predators are not always the ones who act impulsively, but the ones who plan, who wait, and who understand that the systems designed to protect us are often the easiest to exploit. It is also a reminder that guilt, conscience, and the human need for truth can survive decades of silence, and that sometimes justice comes not from law enforcement, but from the people who loved those we have lost.